Smug Maga propagandist Scott Jennings appeared on Kaitlan Collins' show to discuss the ongoing government shutdown, a shutdown that Republicans could stop immediately if they were willing to take responsibility. Instead, pundits like Jennings and politicians like Maga Mike Johnson keep performing for the cameras, pushing the same tired narrative that Democrats are somehow at fault for the mess their own party created. It's political theater at its worst, blame-shifting dressed up as commentary. Jennings' reaction in this exchange exposes exactly what's wrong with that entire MAGA mindset. The moment Karen Finney calmly asked for honesty with the American people, he snapped. Defensive, irritated, condescending, everything but honest. You can see the frustration bubbling the second his talking points start to crumble. That's what happens when spin meets substance. MAGA operatives like Jennings aren't used to being challenged on air because most of their arguments can't survive basic scrutiny. Karen Finney didn't attack him, she held him accountable, and that's why he lost composure so quickly. It wasn't about her tone or her words, it was about the truth. MAGA pundits like Jennings thrive on controlling the conversation, interrupting, deflecting, and painting themselves as victims whenever they're cornered by facts. But here, that control slipped. What we saw was a man uncomfortable with honesty, struggling to maintain authority when the illusion of righteousness began to fall apart. And it's symbolic of the larger Republican behavior we've been seeing for years: create chaos, deny responsibility, and then blame the people trying to clean it up. When that pattern is called out, they don't reflect, they explode. Jennings' reaction wasn't just unprofessional, it was revealing. It showed us how fragile the MAGA narrative really is when confronted with reality.
White House is arguing today.
Well, the president did try to bring them into the room the other day, and they wouldn't budge. I mean, look, the facts here are pretty simple. The Republican Party has put on the floor and voted for a clean, continuing resolution, no changes. These are Biden budget numbers, by the way, and numbers that Democrats have voted for 13 times. Nothing up our sleeves here, Kaitlan. They're trying to keep the government open long enough to negotiate things like the health care issue, which you were just debating, which I actually think maybe Republicans will wind up dealing on that. But they're not going to do it under duress, and they're not going to do it under threat of rolling back all the Medicaid reforms that were done this summer. So I think President Trump tried to bring the Democrats in. And at the end of the day, I think the American people know here they're looking at two parties. One's trying to do a bunch of funny business. One's trying to keep the doors open. And right now, I don't think the funny business side is winning in the eyes of the American people.
Karen, what's your view on that?
Well, I just want to correct something. You know, Scott, you know how much I respect you, but let's be honest here. I
don't need to be corrected, and I don't need to be told I'm dishonest, Karen. But by all means, go ahead.
I didn't say it. I said let's be honest with the American people here.
I am.
Well,
you ought to try
CR that I'm doing it right now, brother. So the CR is that the Republicans have proposed is actually not clean. It's pretty dirty because it includes the $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts that the American people themselves have made clear they do not like. So it is not the same. I think it'd be a very different moment and conversation if literally we were talking about what was passed in 2024. That is not the actual fact of the case. The fact of the case is that the measure is something that, again, the American people themselves have said they do not like. The other piece of this is, I think Democrats have a clear, concise message in terms of health care. I mean, think about this. Republicans are on the side of saying we have to protect these tax cuts for billionaires. That's going to impact the wealthiest 1%. Democrats are saying we want to protect health care for over 20 million American families. And I agree with what, I was glad Senator Smith pointed out. I also just got my email today about my health care and choosing a plan. So people are already seeing that their costs are going to go up starting in January 2026. So I think Democrats feel pretty strong about this because the politics have changed. And, the last thing I would just say on this, my first government shutdown, Scott, I know you've been through a few of them too, was in the Clinton administration, and the kind of backslapping, oh, we're just joking that we heard from the vice president today. Well, we heard that from Newt Gingrich, and he was, bracing for the fight, and we all know how that worked out. I don't think the American people like seeing the president make light of their health care or their jobs.
Scott, you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. Look, we're stunned. I'll just be honest with you. We're stunned. The Democratic constituencies are principally immigration populations and government workers. And right now,
I'm a Democrat, and I'm not an immigrant, and I'm not a government worker.
You're putting one on top of
yourself.
You're putting one on top of the other.
My mother is a Democrat. She's not an immigrant. She's not a government worker.
This is what your party relies on, and you've closed shop on government in Washington, D.C., and eventually they're going to get tired of it. There is no reason this government cannot be left
Americans
open.
Who vote.
It's honestly hilarious to watch how smug Scott Jennings gets when anyone dares to challenge his narrative. He bristles at the word honesty like it's a personal attack. And in a way, it is, because he's one of the most disingenuous political commentators on TV. This guy goes from Kaitlan Collins' show to Abby Phillips' panel, parroting the same talking points every single time. He calls himself a conservative analyst, but what he really does is dress up misinformation in a polite Southern accent. Every line he delivers is crafted to protect MAGA interests and shift blame toward Democrats. And the irony of him talking about the president trying to bring people together is unreal. He's referring to Donald Trump, the same man who is actively telling Republicans not to negotiate with Democrats. Jennings knows that. He's fully aware of it, yet he goes on national TV pretending it's Biden's fault that the government is gridlocked. That's not debate, that's performance. It's politics as theater, where the goal isn't truth, but winning airtime and preserving the illusion that MAGA leadership is capable of governing. His reaction to Karen Finney saying, "Let's be honest with the American people," perfectly captures the fragility of this whole act. He couldn't stand being corrected by someone who came armed with facts, so he lashed out. That's the MAGA formula. Play victim when called out, cry about tone, and then accuse others of being unfair. Jennings doesn't just mislead viewers, he gaslights them. He builds a reality where Republicans are always the victims, Democrats are always the villains, and Trump is somehow still the peacemaker. And let's not ignore the part where he essentially insulted immigrants and government workers, implying Democrats only care about those groups, as if that's something shameful. That's the quiet part said out loud. MAGA pundits like Jennings want you to think compassion and public service are weaknesses. But it's people like him, sitting comfortably in studios, spreading disinformation, who do the most damage. He hides behind analysis while pushing division. Karen Finney, on the other hand, stayed composed and factual. She didn't stoop to his level. She simply reminded the audience of reality that the so-called clean Republican proposal is laced with deep Medicaid cuts and policies Americans overwhelmingly reject. That's why Jennings got defensive. Because honesty exposes MAGA propaganda for what it is. A performance built on denial, ego, and bad faith.
Kamala Harris were all immigrants?
No,
that's not true.
I'm saying I'm listening to Democratic arguments about most policy issues, and I'm looking at Democratic energy, and it mostly has to do with things to do with immigrants, illegal and some legal, and things to do with government bureaucrats. And right now, you're putting one of your constituencies out of business.
Can I say one thing, which is that people who are legally cannot get these subsidies that we're talking about?
Sure they can.
No, they can't.
No, they can't. It's federal law, Scott.
Who do you think pays when they go to the emergency room? It's the Medicaid emergency program.
Going to the emergency room is not getting an Obamacare subsidy.
You guys are conflating. You guys are conflating these issues. You're conflating these issues.
And you're being dishonest with the
subsidies are a separate issue. The Medicaid program cuts are a different thing.
Right, but I'm talking about subsidies.
And the Obamacare stuff are two different issues. And I said the subsidies may get negotiated over time. But what Democrats want to do is roll back what the Republican Medicaid reforms were. They want, look, I don't understand why everybody's so mad. For time immemorial, Democrats have argued that it's good. It's good for illegal immigrants to get Medicaid. Every candidate for president in 2020 raised their hand for it. In the big, beautiful bill debate, they argued it was good policy. I can't believe there's an about face of the Democratic Party on it today.
Hold on. I got a question for Karen, but Scott, I will say, people who are in the country illegally also can't get Medicaid.
Sure they can. Sure they can.
They can't get Medicaid.
They also can't register to vote. They also can't register to vote, but we just found one in Maryland who was running the Des Moines school system.
Oh my God, one!
I mean, I'm telling you, you guys say these things can't happen, and then they happen.
Scott, but I'm just saying it's federal law. And
you can run cover for it if you want, but they do get federal tax money. They get federal tax money. Ask Jake, he had it on today.
I'm just saying it's against federal law to do that.
It is.
Karen, can I ask you, because one thing that we've heard from Democrats over the last several months is that the president's consolidation of power is dangerous. That's how Democrats have framed this. But now what House Speaker Mike Johnson, the point he was making here last night, is that Democrats have handed the president more power by shutting the government down, because now they're canceling and stopping these contracts and saying they're going to fire a bunch of federal workers during this period. Was that a mistake in your view?
Well, but again, the president, it's a choice that the president can make. I mean, governing is all about choices, right? The leader of the country can say, hey, I'm going to protect tax cuts for billionaires, or I'm going to make sure over 20 million American families can get the subsidies they need to afford their health care and not see it double. And by the way, Russell Vought is not someone who, this government is, we know they're going to doge their way through the rest of the federal government anyway. I don't think there's much credibility in saying, hey, we're going to use this to lay people off. I mean, I just want to consider, it's a different pot of money, but think about the optics. The White House confirmed to Fox News today that the construction of the Grand Ballroom will continue while they are talking about laying people off and potentially firing people. That is outrageous. If you're serious about negotiating, as the senator said, you don't do things like that. You say, we are going to bring everybody to the table. Let's see what we can get done. And Scott, that part of the reason this issue around the ACA credits, as the senator, I think, pointed out, there's not a lot of credibility here. So let's act like adults. Let's come to the table and stop making threats about, we're going to fire these people and we're going to, you know what, you're the leader. It's your job to bring people together.
Scott Jennings is the embodiment of MAGA spin, smug, performative, and deeply dishonest. He sits on CNN panels acting like the voice of reason while pushing long debunked talking points that mislead viewers and fuel outrage. In this clip, Jennings leans into one of MAGA's favorite lies, that undocumented immigrants are receiving Medicaid and Obamacare subsidies. It's a claim meant to trigger resentment, not reflect reality. He knows these programs are off limits to undocumented immigrants under federal law, yet he repeats the falsehood because it plays well with his base. The irony is that Jennings pretends to be defending taxpayers, when in truth, the only thing he's defending is a decades-old talking point designed to dehumanize immigrants and distract from Republican policy failures. The reality, which he deliberately avoids, is that hospitals are reimbursed by Medicaid when they treat uninsured patients in emergency situations. That's not a handout to immigrants, it's a safeguard to prevent hospitals from collapsing under unpaid bills. Reagan signed that policy into law, the same Reagan the GOP worships. Jennings knows this, but honesty doesn't fit the MAGA narrative. Karen Finney handled it like a professional. She calmly corrected him, reminded everyone that these claims are lies, and recentered the conversation on healthcare access for millions of Americans. Jennings, on the other hand, couldn't stay grounded. He deflected, changed topics, and dragged in unrelated myths about voter fraud, another MAGA favorite that's been debunked in every serious study. Billions of ballots have been reviewed over multiple elections, and the actual fraud rate is statistically zero. The rare cases that do exist, usually Republican voters, but you'll never hear Jennings admit that. Watching him sneer and smirk while spreading misinformation says everything about MAGA's media strategy. Confidence over truth, projection over integrity. Jennings isn't debating in good faith. He's auditioning for applause from the right-wing bubble. And when faced with facts, he does what every MAGA propagandist does. Talks louder, gets smugger, and hopes viewers don't notice the contradictions piling up behind him. What makes it worse is how easily these lies stick. Jennings knows repetition creates belief, say it enough times, and people start accepting it as fact. That's why MAGA media leans on the same narratives. Immigrants stealing benefits, voter fraud everywhere, Democrats destroying America. It's not an argument, it's a strategy of emotional manipulation. And unless voices like Karen's keep pushing back, misinformation becomes the default reality for millions of people just trying to make sense of the news. So next time you see Jennings on a panel, remember that smirk isn't confidence, it's deflection. It's the mask of a pundit who knows he's selling a story, not telling the truth. If you're tired of that kind of political performance, if you believe facts still matter, make sure to subscribe and keep supporting commentary that calls out the spin for what it is.